All right, everybody. Hi, it's Phil here, minus Mills. He's currently sleeping. Like we said in a previous episode, he actually does have to go to work and go to school quite often. He's a working man. He's a schooling man. So I'm here today with an interview with a friend of mine named Classic Rock, it says right there in the corner on the Skype button.
Known as Stooge Man on Twitter.
Yes, but he's known as Stooge Man on Twitter. Now, you can see up here I have his Twitter page, and you can see a lot of stuff, like he retweeted something by John Podesta, he retweeted something from Free Assange, and he retweeted something from the WikiLeaks task force. Now, he's at Stooge Man Polly on Twitter, excuse me. I'm having a hard time speaking today. So, yeah, did you want to talk to the adoring public about anything at all? Like why you like WikiLeaks or anything of that nature?
Yeah, the main reason is when I first started getting into WikiLeaks, I knew very little about Julian Assange than what was told in the media. For instance, I remember Bob Beckel saying he wanted him dead, and if Bob Beckel wants you dead, you're doing something right. But, you know, in the case of Julian, I did more research. I found out he's a market libertarian. I found out he has an IQ of over 170. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, this dude, you know, he knows what he's doing. And then the more I read into WikiLeaks, you know, the more I realized how important it is that you need a lot of transparency in your government. Like, WikiLeaks brought me to a point where I really hate to say this, but I'm starting to believe firmly in privacy, well, the right to privacy for individuals, but not for people holding higher public office. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I think that, like, for instance, what's going on with Hillary Clinton, she should be completely exempt from the right to privacy until she stops being a public worker.
That would make sense because, I mean, you are a public worker at that point. And the same thing actually is already true. There's legal precedent for it in the case of people that are celebrities. And I can't imagine somebody would have much more celebrity than the ability to control our country and looked up to and representing entire portions of the United States constituency, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if celebrities don't have a right to privacy, then why should an elected official who presumably millions of people know about? Yeah.
I think a lot of it's out of fear, too. For instance, a celebrity can't really have you killed. You know, we see it all the times with politicians. If a politician wants you dead, there's a fair chance that you'll probably wind up dead.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the DNC, my friends. What's the death toll on that?
There's enough conspiracy theories about it. You know, I'm not going to validate or say I believe in conspiracy theories, but it's enough to really make you think, especially the Seth Rich incident. Care to explain that, just for people listening who may not have heard of that? Yes, Seth Rich was a worker for the DNC who Julian Assange and his organization WikiLeaks referenced to and basically hinted, or so-called hinted, that he was an informant for WikiLeaks from the DNC, and then a while later he wound up getting shot in the back and left for dead in the Washington, D.C. streets. He passed away shortly after.
Yeah. From what I heard, it was suicide.
It's always suicide.
I should be laughing about that, but I mean, getting shot in the back, it's kind of hard to kill yourself. That's the whole joke. Yeah. Not much of a joke, but...
There's your first controversy.
Yeah. No, if we haven't had a controversy within our first episode where we pretty much laid out who we were and what we believed and what we were doing, then I can't imagine we're going to have that many controversies later on, because it's pretty fairly obvious from the people who heard us that we're going to talk from every point of view about everything, and we're not going to radically disagree with each other or get in fights. We're just going to talk about it. I think that if that in and of itself doesn't stir up some controversy, then we're pretty sound.
Like, oh God, we're talking common sense.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Voltaire said it and it still rings true. Common sense is not so common.
Nope. That's why I had to read about it in a book by Thomas Paine. So, when you say that you're a libertarian, what does that entail from your point of view? Because I know that there's a Libertarian Party, which I have a couple of bumper stickers from them. I mean... Yeah, and I know that Gary Johnson is a pretty popular choice among people that are trying to vote third party, and he's part of the Libertarian Party. But based on what I've read about libertarianism, wouldn't that be contradictory to the underlying philosophy of libertarianism, is to have a party in government for it?
Well, it really depends. And I'm going to go on that last point you just said for a minute. If we're going to take a look at the British Parliament when the Irish were rebelling against the United Kingdom, the way that they went in is that even though that they were Republicans, they wanted to get rid of the monarchy altogether. People in Northern Ireland would join the British Parliament in order to try to secede. Now, in the case of the libertarian ideology, there are so many different ideologies that can be considered libertarian. You have classical liberalism, which is where I'd put myself. You have anarcho-capitalism. You have libertarian socialism, which if you take a good look at it, it's a complete oxymoron. You have fusionism, which is, what created the Reagan coalition. Take Ron Paul, Ronald Reagan, mix them together, you get a fusionist. And then, of course, there's the, I believe they're called cosmopolitan libertarians, which are only out there to get money and make themselves look good.
Yeah, I've never referred to them as the cosmopolitan libertarians. I've always referred to them as ethical hedonists, but that's just where I come from on that standpoint. I don't actually think that they're real libertarians. I think that they focus more on individualism than they actually focus on individualism for everybody else. So I don't think it's so much of a philosophy of politics as it is just a worldview.
Yeah, I completely agree, but you mentioned, you also asked what libertarianism means to me. I always put libertarianism on the far right. People put fascism on the far right, but I believe if you take a really good look at it, you look at the economic policies of the government and the corporations getting into bed with each other and screwing over the small businesses so they can put more money into their pockets. If anything, that sounds pretty left-wing to me. It's also called corporate socialism and crony capitalism for a reason, because it's not a free capitalist system. If we take a look at libertarianism, it comes from the old classical liberal thinkers, for instance, John Locke, Benjamin Franklin, and Voltaire. Protection of private property, protection of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, and a lot of them were very anti-monarchistic. And if we're going to talk about, what libertarian is, and the best document for a libertarian to read is the Constitution, which is also the most traditional document in the country. If right-wing is all about tradition, then there is nothing more right-wing in this country than a libertarian. So that's how I view it.
Now, I always thought of libertarians as being more on the bottom of the two-dimensional, the whole Brownian political scale thing where they keep it in simply two dimensions with liberal on the left side and conservative on the right, and then libertarian is up and down. You're saying that you'd prefer to think of it almost as a one-dimensional thing where it's a sliding scale?
It really depends on the country and what the tradition is. Like, for instance, back in the 1700s, capitalism was considered a extremely left-wing ideology because it wasn't tradition.
Yeah.
It was a new thing made to strengthen equality. But if you look at, that scale, the reason why that those scales were made wasn't because of the economic policies being implemented. It was because mainly of the social issues. That's why Adolf Hitler is always called a far right-winger, which if you really look at his economic policies, he's very, very left. They never took a good look at economics. Like, I heard Mary Rothbard go off saying he was criticizing right-wingers, but the problem is that to many right libertarians, I consider myself one of them, Mary would be considered probably the most right-wing American to ever live.
Yeah. Which is funny because you think about it, in context of our country and our social values and our politics, we try to almost indiscriminately keep those things not separated. Whereas other countries focus on social and economic issues independently, we seem to believe that anything that involves a social issue is also an economic issue and vice versa. So we don't really discriminate in our country between the two. Do you think that should be something we should do? Keep it more of an ideal, like, oh, this is a good social policy, this is a good economic policy? Or do you think we should see them as the way we currently do, which is this is an issue of morals as well as an issue of economics, as well as an issue of politics, as well as an issue of social engineering, basically, to create our society?
Well, if we're going to take a look at it like that, the first thing is that most libertarians believe that morals should never, ever be legislated because nobody has the same moral code.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we're going to take a look at social issues, in a way you have to look at the costs. But I believe that that was part of the reason why the most abused amendment, the 10th Amendment, was created. You know, for instance, you have an organization like Planned Parenthood. Don't get me wrong. I'm pro Planned Parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you're going to read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it is not a federal issue in any stretch of the imagination. It's a complete state issue because the government states nothing about pregnancies, nothing about any kind of health care. It's completely a state thing. A perfect example of healthcare being a state rights thing was, if you remember, when Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, he instituted Romney Care, which was Obamacare V1. Every other state didn't really have that. So if we're going to talk about, you know, what was it, discriminating social policies and economic policies and separate, then I really don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because it really has to go by the 10th Amendment. And that's how I vote. That's how I do everything. Constitution always comes first.
I think that's what I was trying to get at by asking that question, to be honest, was, are you a constitutionalist, and do you believe that there's room for change in the Constitution over time? Because a lot of constitutionalists say, nope, it's a done deal. What's in the Constitution is what we have to abide by. And I completely agree with that in terms of the law. We should always hold our laws to a constitutional standard, but is it something that we should not question?
If we are ever going to violate the Constitution, we should at least make an amendment that will let us violate it. For instance, we instituted the Patriot Act while violating the Fourth Amendment while doing it.
Yeah.
But we didn't put in another amendment to nullify the Fourth Amendment. We just went off and did it. That's completely heinous.
That is absolutely true. That is horrible.
In a way, I do sort of believe that the Constitution is a living document, but at the same time, I believe that there are certain things within the Constitution that you should never, ever mess with. The First Amendment is the big one, and you know, you look at Donald Trump's campaign, he wants to make laws on libel. If you do that, any journalist can go to prison.
Yeah, which is not what we need, because you can already exploit almost anything using a libel law and get punitive damages from it. So you can literally enforce your beliefs on somebody else's words by charging them money on it if you take it to court, which is unfortunate because you can say something's slander, you can say something's libel. And again, it doesn't work the same if you're a celebrity because they don't have the right to privacy. But there's legal precedents that basically allow you to shut down people already. And to make it a legally binding law that's federally enforced is not good.
No, I completely agree with you there.
Which is funny because I'm pretty on the left, but I'm more of a classical liberal left, and you're pretty far on the right, as you've made quite clear.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you look at what right wing is described as, complete traditionalism, complete conservatism, I mean, I always you can criticize me for this all you want, but I always say the Christian right should be called the Christian left because they're not completely supporting what the tradition of this country is, which, for Christ's sake, this country was founded by deists, for one.
Literally.
Raging capitalists.
Oh, yeah.
Secularists. I mean, you know, you have these Christian right-wingers going off about how bad gambling is. Guess what? It's capitalism. Prostitution, it's capitalism. And over in Nevada, it's working. And there's not a whole AIDS fest going on in those things.
For real.
They're clean, completely clean. And so, you know, whenever I think of right wing versus left wing, in this country, maybe it's different in some other countries going by their tradition. But in this country, if we look at the far right, then I believe it is definitely about unlimited freedom. I believe that in this country, anarcho-capitalism is the most right-wing form of or non-form of government that you can achieve.
Now, you would probably be saying that to a group of people that would say, Yes, finally somebody said it. Anarcho-capitalism is all right-wing fascists. And that's not what you're saying. You're saying that based on what you see right-wing as, and logically it makes sense to define it that way, the conservative values are more about freedom and protection of individual rights and protection of speech and protection of human rights than the left wing today or always. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. A perfect example of this, in my opinion, my favorite president was probably Calvin Coolidge. And when you look at what Calvin Coolidge did, don't get me wrong, every president does things wrong.
Oh, yeah.
He was a little too restrictive on immigration, but he also gave Native American citizenship. He was a big tax cutter, a big business deregulator. He helped upstart the Roaring '20s. That, in my opinion, is the epitome of the far right in this country. He expanded freedoms as much as he could, and he was anti-war, which was another big thing of the Founding Fathers. Well, half of the Founding Fathers. Then, in my opinion, the epitome of the left wing would be Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, man. Freaking... I'm sorry. As a liberal individual, I just have to say, freaking Woodrow Wilson was a racist, he was a bigot, and people loved him.
They still love him. And
Yeah.
this is one point where I'll give credit to President Obama. And you're going to love this because this will not happen often. In the case of President Obama, you heard this story with Lyndon Johnson when he was on the plane, right, with the governors?
Mm-hmm.
He said to them, when I pass the Civil Rights Act, those N-words will be voting for me for the next 200 years. Basically saying he's going to get the whole African American population to vote Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Barack Obama said that Lyndon Johnson should have changed his views on race. He said that, and I completely applaud him for it. But nobody will ever say that about Woodrow Wilson. And the reason why is because he was the great old president during World War I. And let's all forget the fact that he had Alice Paul force-fed. He was completely prejudiced against women's rights. He was the prime example of, in my opinion, what the left wing in this country. No offense, I know you describe yourself as a liberal.
Oh, but I'm not a left winger. I'm far more close to moderate and a little to the left, and also very much down. I'm pretty libertarian for a liberal individual. I just believe in certain things that would classify me as a liberal.
I understand that. You know, going by that point, I was having a conversation with my dad, and I'm going to be honest, when I was like in 7th grade, you have to understand I went to Catholic school.
Oh.
I was big on the whole Christianity and politics thing. And my dad was the one. My dad's a atheist conservative.
Like Miles. Oh my goodness.
Exactly. And he turned me, into, being pro-gay marriage. And he said, I really don't care what they say, but conservatism is about small government. If you're pro-gay marriage, then that, in my opinion, that makes you more of a conservative. And I believe that is absolutely right. Where I disagree, though, with many pro-gay marriage advocates is like the Supreme Court decision that made it legal across the country.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that they messed up royally in that because that court case wasn't about making gay marriage legal. It was about, say,
enforcing the law on people who would otherwise not want to do that.
No, not really. Let's say if there was this, basically what it was there was a gay couple in Vermont. They got married in Vermont. Then they moved to Iowa, but Iowa wouldn't accept their marriage, so they took it to court. Now, if I was a judge on the Supreme Court, I would have supported them, accepting the marriage over state lines, and I would have made that a law that any marriage is completely validated no matter where the couple comes from.
Mm-hmm.
I would have no problem supporting that. But what they messed up was that instead of doing that, they made gay marriage completely legal. 30 plus states already had it legal. They completely curbed the 10th Amendment when they did that, and that's what completely annoyed me about it.
So how do you feel it curbed the 10th Amendment? Like, explain the logic behind it. Because from what I've heard, based on the Supreme Court's decision, it didn't curb the 10th Amendment, but it merely set a precedent for federal action as opposed to actually being affected by the 10th Amendment.
Well, the way you look at it is like, for instance, well, just before I answer, our interpretations of the Constitution are going to be very different.
Okay.
But if we look at the 10th Amendment very specifically, it says any issue that is not left up to the federal government is a state decision or a decision of the people, and that one's very clear. It's basically saying hold a referendum.
Yeah.
What they did was, though, the couple from New Hampshire, already married, goes to Iowa. Iowa didn't want to count their marriage. It wasn't about making gay marriage legal in Iowa. It was validating a couple's marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And they, in my opinion, they curbed the 10th Amendment by doing it.
Okay, I can actually see where you're coming from with that. So basically, let me just reiterate this once. I don't want to harp on it for too long, but basically what you're saying is the way they did it wasn't to validate gay marriage's legality across the country. It was simply imposing the federal government's will on a state issue by telling them they had to make something legal.
I don't really believe that was their intention, but I believe that was, the outcome. Like I said, I completely believe that if you get married in one state, it should be validated in every state. And I agree with the Supreme Court stating that should be a law.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a, equality thing going on there. But when it comes down to marriage itself, first of all, to be completely clear with you, I don't think that marriage should be a government-issued thing. I think it should be between two or more consenting adults. Yes, I support polygamous marriage too.
I agree.
It's just one of those things where, you keep curbing the 10th Amendment like this. You keep telling states, you have to do this with marriage, you have to do that. Look, if you can curb one amendment, you can curb any amendment.
And it does become a slippery slope.
And yeah, it's becoming that.
Now, with that in mind, like your entire position on it being constitutional, what do you think about some of the policies being proposed by the upcoming presidential candidates?
Oh, dear God, where do I start? In the case of Hillary Clinton.
Nightmare.
Let's take a look at her past. She voted for the goddamn Patriot Act. This isn't a family show. I'm allowed to curse, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, she voted for the Patriot Act. She supported the war in Iraq, but, I can't really complain about that with constitutionality because George Bush actually did abide the Constitution by doing it. He went to Congress for the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
I have to give it to him. She basically, it was proven through the WikiLeaks emails that the DNC controls NBC, and we all knew who the DNC was pulling for.
And we all knew that already. Like, we all knew that the Democratic Party had their hands in the pockets of NBC, MSNBC. That wasn't shocking at all.
But we didn't know to the extent. For instance, there's one show on NBC called Morning Joe.
Yeah.
And it's hosted by Joe Scarborough, who, if I'm not mistaken, used to be a Republican congressman.
Yeah.
And I read one of the emails, and one of the emails said, this is an almost direct quote, I don't remember it fully, but it stated, Joe, mentioning a rigged system from our party, we need to complain to his producer. That's not freedom of the press at all.
But he's not the press. He's owned by the party because he works for the party's network.
In a way, you could debate that, but at the same time, he was a Republican,
Yeah, he was. But they got to expect it. They're not paying him for a dissenting opinion. They're paying him to say his lines, basically.
Very true. Yeah.
So anywhere else, if he was doing this independently, I would absolutely agree. And it's sickening to think that people can control other people's speech. But in that instance, if he says it on TV, on their network, then they're paying him. They can tell him what they want him to say and what they don't want him to say.
The thing is, though, is like, for instance, they call this journalism.
No. I don't think anybody would accuse them of being journalistic.
Oh, please, I've done the opposite. I basically went on a few comment boards on MSNBC and I told them to act like real journalists. I told them WikiLeaks embarrasses you in so many ways it's not even funny.
It's true, because you know what's funny? You know what's absolutely hilarious? Is that they try everything in their power to discredit WikiLeaks. Everything. They try to point out fallacies about them, saying, oh, you can't believe that they would say such a thing, and oh, it's all forged by Russians. But it's everything they said has been fact-checked. Almost every single thing in WikiLeaks' arsenal has been fact-checked, except Hillary Clinton's emails, which Hillary Clinton proved herself that they were real.
Yeah, and the funny thing is when she proved to herself that when she proved to the world that they were real, WikiLeaks and John Podesta were going at it over Twitter.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious.
John Podesta said, "Oh, I can't confirm the authenticity of that email," and WikiLeaks is like, "No, don't worry, Hillary already did." Thank you. I mean, it's like, but I mean, even if it was the Russians, I would actually be glad the Russians are doing this. And I don't care if they'd be doing it to the Republicans or Democrats.
Well, I would care about it if they were forging it. If they hacked it and released it like she said they did, which proved the authenticity, then I'm totally okay with that. They can steal her information that she got privately, and I don't care. Because you know what?
I mean, if it was forged, it would be a complete, utter problem.
Absolutely.
But it's not forged. It's not forged at all. And I mean, if we're going to take a big look at Russia for a minute, I remember in 2012 when Mitt Romney was debating Barack Obama, Mitt Romney said Russia would be a threat in the future. Hillary Clinton's ilk and her apparent media paramilitary machine, MSNBC, go out there and they ridicule him. You can find the video on YouTube. Just look up Chris Matthews, Mitt Romney, Russia. They ridicule Mitt for having that, for saying Russia's going to be a problem. What's Hillary Clinton bitching about? Russia. Looks like she should have endorsed Mitt.
And you know what's ridiculous is that she can cast all these stones to Russia because they're not in her pocket. And it's even worse that she's blaming another world power for every single thing that she's bringing on herself. And that just looks so childish and weak. Now, I'm not saying Hillary Clinton's weak. I mean, she's paid by everybody. She's paid by Qatar and paid by Saudi Arabia. That's not weak. That's just dirty business. I'm not going to call her weak because of that. I'm calling her weak because she can't take responsibility for the fact that she did something stupid. And when she does even come close to it, she says, yes, I shouldn't have had them on a private server. You can't then point the fingers at somebody else with the same exact world power as you in the UN, in the very thing you're endorsing, and say, but it's their fault. They stole it from me, I swear. How can you do that? How can you antagonize somebody that we're supposed to be on the same level as in the world? I'm sorry. I just get angry about that.
No, please. It was logical. I'm actually glad you said that because that, brings up the point, if we're going to talk about, let's go into Syria for a minute here. If we look at the Syrian civil war, you have the government of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, funded by Russia. Then you have the Army of Conquest, which is a bunch of terrorists funded by us. Then you have ISIS, funded by no one. And then you have my personal favorite, and there's the reason why it's a personal favorite, the Kurds, funded by us. What happens if the Kurds and the Army of Conquest take out ISIS and they go to war? Who are we going to fund? And not only that, but Russia, for Christ's sake, we could use Russia as a great ally right now instead of instituting a no-fly zone, which Russia is already thinking about doing because they think Hillary Clinton's going to win.
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sakes, you could be working with them.
Especially from a party whose entire line is to get dedicated to convincing the public that people need to work together in this world, that we need to relinquish our power, we need to relinquish the internet, we need to relinquish our sovereignty, we need to relinquish everything that makes America powerful for the sake of communication with other countries and for the sake of cooperation with other world powers. And yet, they're blaming other world powers for things that are our fault. And again, I wouldn't say ISIS is completely unfunded because the WikiLeaks emails prove that there's connections to the Saudi Arabian government and the Kingdom of Qatar that are funding them.
Funded the Clintons, yeah.
Yeah, funding the Clintons and funding ISIS. Now, I don't know how much they're funding them or if they're giving them weapons or if they're doing that or if they're training them or anything like that, but there's connections that exist to ISIS from Hillary Clinton's foundation. That's a scary thought that somebody's influencing us who's also influencing ISIS.
I remember I was in a debate once and he brought up Putin and Trump secretly funding ISIS. And I'm thinking, dear God. I mean, for Christ's sake, if that's the case, why is Putin currently bombing his investment?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But you know what does make sense? Hillary Clinton protecting her investment by trying to stay on good relations with everybody but Russia. Yeah, no, that is completely true. You see,
And I think a part of the reason why she is so mad with Russia is because she didn't know the difference between restart and reset. Did you ever hear that, Gaff?
No.
Yeah, she apparently gave the Russian government a gaming console, and it said restart or reset on it. I forget which one. She said, it says, restart on it. And one of the Russian government people looked at her and they were like, no, it doesn't. It says restart. I mean, and plus, not only that, but I think another thing is that another reason why we are so anti-Russia right now is because if you remember a few years ago, the government of Syria was blamed for releasing chemical weapons against the rebels.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that the rebels were proven to do it too by the Russian government. If that is the case, then why are we involved if it's that much of a problem to figure out who's gassing who? Why would you take either side?
I mean,
why are we taking either side? Why have we been taking sides since 1953?
That's one of the proposed reasons that we went to war in Iraq, which is unequivocally true, is that chemical weapons and biological weapons were being tested on people. But I can't help but feel like that's a front, because the United States has been so fixated on the Middle East for so long, and we created the Middle East. We created a lot of the tensions and problems in the Middle East by post-World War II colonialism. Oh, let's just separate these diverse groups from each other and make them live multiculturally in a system where they have to see the very people who want to kill them.
Yeah.
And we thought that was a good idea. Now, I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but we as a country and we as an allied nations, as a group of allied nations, decided that would be wise. And I can honestly say at no point in American history class have I ever been told that we were right to manipulate other countries or other countries' borders. And I don't know why that wouldn't still ring true.
Well, the strange thing is that when we first got involved, if I remember right, it was 1953, when we got involved in Iran and overthrow the Shah.
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda, when they sent the planes into the World Trade Center, they said that was a response to Western aggression. And what's the first thing we said? They attacked us because they hate the fact we're free.
Yeah.
Really think they care whether or not we're free? Why are we still over there? It doesn't make sense. And then you have not George H., although he was a ding-dong too.
Yeah.
You have his son go off, who ran in 2000 as somebody who was very similar to Ron Paul, very anti-war, now blowing the horn for the war machine. And it's just so messed up over there. And a lot of it is our fault. We don't know when to leave things alone. We have a big power trip in our mind. It's not as simple as Calvin Coolidge anymore. It's not as simple as being anti-war. You have pro-war candidates from both parties. I mean, this is the first time this whole election cycle, it took me until I had to hear Hillary Clinton to speak to even think that Donald Trump was going to be a dove. And somehow he managed to play the dove part. And how he's doing it.
The anti-war left has been missing for almost a decade since I've gotten into politics. Once George Bush was out of office, the anti-war left disappeared, and I was stunned because Obama's been drawing hard lines and authorized more dronings than any president. He's pulling the Bill Clinton card and saying, yeah, we destroyed that factory full of innocent people, whatever, it's just the cost of war. And we're not even in war. We're not in a time of war with any country officially. But he's writing things off as if we are. Oh, yeah, no, it's the cost of saving lives and going to war. And we're not. Now, we're not the only people guilty of that, that's for sure. Russia also occupied Afghanistan for a very long time. And to tell you the truth, most Afghani people don't know the difference between a Russian person speaking Russian and an American person speaking English. They just see people in uniforms with guns occupying their cities and trying to change their government, and they know it's happening. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if most of those people in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran didn't even know who America was, except the people that were like, oh yeah, they're the bad guys who have been occupying our cities forever, which is completely understandable because we have been, but we aren't the only ones.
Oh, I'm sure the Afghans knew, because you have to remember what kicked the Soviets out was the Mujahideen.
Mujahideen, yeah.
Yeah, who was funded by us. So they had to know, hey, they're helping us, but they're not going to leave. I think when they looked at the Soviet Union and the United States, the only difference they saw with the power trip was the flag. We don't have an all red flag with a yellow hammer and a yellow sickle.
Yeah.
But they're still going to view us as the enemy because we're over there. And the only way for them not to view us as an enemy is for us to leave. You know, the more you try to fix things, you're either going to make it worse or make it better. And it will always, 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 always get worse if you don't understand the culture and you don't know what you're doing. We haven't known what we've been doing since Operation Iraqi Freedom. And that's an issue.
Yeah.
When we went into Iraq, I don't ever think we should have went into Iraq.
Me neither.
When we went into Iraq, we had a reason to go in. Saddam was putting chemical weapons on the curbs, which actually does qualify as a weapon of mass destruction, though no one wants to mention Saddam was actually using them because it makes the Republicans look bad.
Absolutely.
When we went in, we had a mighty and noble cause, but you can't nation build. We should have never went to war in Iraq.
I agree.
We completely threw off the Middle East. And the ironic thing is that Dick Cheney in 1998 said we should never go to war in Iraq because we're just going to screw it all up. Where was that Dick Cheney? He's nowhere to be found now.
Yeah. And it's shocking because no matter how you look at it, right now we have a president who's absurdly hawkish, trying to make demands and craft ultimatums for people in Syria. And now we know there's genocide in Syria. Now we know that people are bombing their own citizens in Syria. But we're drawing hard lines against the country itself. Back in 2011, 2012. Why? Why are we even trying to nation build in countries that we don't understand?
Because power. You know, and that's a strange thing. You know, when you get into a presidency, you know, for instance, like Barack Obama did, you're going to have people that are going to tell you, look, I know you ran on a platform that was very, very anti-war, but it's probably in America's best interest to stay over there. Now, if that's the case, then you know what? What president is not going to listen to his advisors?
Absolutely.
But if the case was to achieve more and more and more power, then any respect for Barack Obama's foreign policy just right out the window.
Absolutely. And you know, I know a lot of people give him flack over snubbing other presidents and other presidents snubbing him and world leaders not liking him and him not liking world leaders. That's not exclusively a Barack Obama problem. That happens to every world leader. And every world leader experiences that, like, just period. Because there's always going to be dynamics and always going to be crowds of people that like you and crowds of people that don't. Even when you're one of the most strong men in the world, you're still going to have detractors. So, yes, I would not explicitly blame Obama for getting snubbed by people like, I don't know, Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Like, that's completely understandable. But at the same time, you've got to look at how the world sees us and say, what are we doing that's making people hate us? And I think that the constituents of this country have a pretty decent understanding of what we're doing that makes people hate us. We're going to their countries, telling them how to live, and changing their societies simply by occupying them with armed soldiers. And once you get past that foundation, there are other things that they might hate us for, but that's fundamentally what we're doing is we're becoming the redcoats, staying in people's homes and living beside them, making sure they're not trying to do anything. And that's scary.
You know, it's interesting you bring up Israel and Netanyahu because it really seems like, you know, we have been doing everything I can to appeal to the Israeli state. And forgive me, but it actually seems like we're getting to a point where, you know, we do everything we can. We go head over heels to please them, and it's never enough for them. Like, you know, this is going to sound maybe twisted.
Probably.
I'm literally looking at Israel as the Israeli welfare state. They just want more and more and more and more and more. They tell us to jump, we ask how high. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Israel. I understand that they're the sanest country in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can't let countries have such an influence on us that we're going to wind up sending our people over there to get killed for interests that a lot of times aren't in our best interests.
Or even align with our own. I mean, you look at what we've done for them by crafting one of the most incredibly technologically advanced pieces of anti-missile technology in the world, the Iron Dome, and you say, okay, we've given them everything they need to protect themselves, and yet we still send people there. We shouldn't have to. Not only that, we send people over there, and we send people to Pakistan, and we send people to Jordan, and we send people to all the surrounding countries that they're attacking too.
Exactly. And how many times could we have helped out other countries? For instance, Turkey's the big one. Turkey used to love us. They used to admire us. They used to adore us. Now they're at a point where they can't stand us. And a big part of the reason is that whenever they asked us for help, we were never there.
Because our interests had to be with Israel. They couldn't have been with Turkey.
Exactly. Because Turkey at a time, their population, we call it sane. Their population was very, very, pro-American because they looked at us as, what every country aspired to be. But then they see, oh, crap, we're not in their interests.
Yeah. And what's shocking is people nowadays, the very same people that will say that they're anti-Muslim or anti-Islam or anti-immigration don't realize that these things are caused and sprouted by the fact that we have historically done exactly what these people have said and not helped out the countries that needed them the most, at which point they're weak, they're powerless, and who do they turn to but a religion of strength that says we can make you conquerors again. And then they become a problem for us, and those same people are saying, oh, well, they're Muslim, they're evil, let's not help them. We weren't helping them anyway. We really weren't. They're not terrorists. They weren't crazy. They looked up to us, and then we let them down, and they needed something to turn to. And Islam can sweep in and say, let's make Turkey great again.
Pun very intended. But, you're absolutely right. And I'm not, really anti any religion. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm anti a lot of theistical thought.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a deist, pandeist.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's a bomb to drop just casually.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if I was just to continue with that, I would be called an atheist, which I'm not.
Yeah, I understand completely. But I mean, not a lot of people have been exposed to that terminology, specifically. Actually, there's probably a lot of terminology that we've used this episode that most people have never heard. Things like ANCAP, ANCOM, pandeist, anti-war left.
Oh, no, everybody knows what the anti-war left is, and now they're just experiencing what the anti-war right is. Thank you, Ron Paul.
Oh, yeah. Ron Paul. What a man. I looked up to him for a very long time, I'll be honest. I still kind of look up to him.
I saw a thing on Facebook saying, it compared Hillary Clinton to the mother, the abusive mom, and Donald Trump to the abusive dad, and everybody wants to live with Grandpa Bernie.
Yeah.
You got to be kidding me. Give me Grandpa Paul.
Yeah.
Why? Because if I work for Grandpa Paul, I'm going to get all the money that I earned, and it's not going to go out to my lazy siblings.
And that's a good thing. But honestly, I believe that if there is a government, it should work for the benefit of the people as a baseline for all. And I don't know. That's just my belief. I know exactly how you feel as a libertarian because I was one for like 6 years when I just didn't know anything else. But now that I've explored, I've kind of erred more towards classical liberalism, but in a definitely Milton Friedman kind of way.
Now, I completely understand that. So, I don't know. I consider you, still on the right, but definitely, not as right-wing as I'd put myself. You know what I mean? But I mean, I'm completely fine with Milton Friedman because it's better than almost everything else. Mm-hmm. But I think he pales in comparison a bit to Mises and Hayek. Mises stated a great point, and that is, it was either Mises or Hayek, I'm not sure which one.
Yeah.
But they said Forgive me.
It's okay.
They said that monopolies only come about when government decides to get involved. And the perfect example of that is going on right now with the EpiPen. You know, we take a look at the EpiPen. It costs $600 for people that really, really need them, could die without them. There was a company that made a rival version of it. They testify to get it, legal. And then they're told, oh, the FDA won't allow this.
Yeah. I hope
You're telling me that we're capitalists?
That is literally the definition of government intervention preventing people from getting what they need.
That's economic fascism. And there's 15 different names for economic fascism. So for those out there, it's also called corporatism, national socialism, crony capitalism, and state capitalism. But it's not, free market at all, because when you look at a free market, it's literally, let's say, Phil.
Yeah.
Let's say Phil opens a business.
Which I have. I have a business.
He does a lot of recording, right?
Absolutely.
Let's say you charge $25 per recording.
Okay.
And I charge, say, $15 per recording because I want to rival with you. And we keep going against each other with the prices. That's how the free market is supposed to work. But that's the beauty of it. That's competition. You have something out there like the EpiPen, and then you have the government say, oh, no, you can't make a rival. Well, how the hell else are people going to get it? Oh, you're going to have it government made and expand it through government healthcare programs. That's only going to cost more to the taxpayer than what the EpiPen or its competitor itself will cost. And it just makes sense.
Absolutely.
Forgive me, I just went on a rant there.
No, it's cool. I mean, it's the exact same thing as saying that, I don't know if you went to school in Philadelphia or anything, but
when I was like 5, I did.
Okay. Then it should hit relatively close to home to say that the schools in Philadelphia are not underfunded, but they're understaffed, underprotected, and they don't have necessities. So they don't have things like employment offices where people that are exclusively there for working on resumes, working on helping kids find job education, things like that. They don't have counselors. They don't have dedicated nurses. They don't have anything. And yet it costs more per capita, per student to the taxpayer than in Bucks County or Montgomery County. The Philadelphia school districts they look the least funded, but in reality, they've bent over to the unions and to the people that are selling them things that the schools basically operate on the same principle. And forgive me if I'm wrong, it could have changed by now, but I doubt it has, given what I know about the legal system and how that operates at a fundamental level, especially in the jurisdictions of Philadelphia. But they have to go for what appears to be the least cost, but people don't have to define what unit of measurement they're using when they give the gross estimate or the quotes. So somebody can say, oh, we're going to be less expensive than the next guy, but they don't have to say how or why. So what the school systems have right now is millions of dollars spent on single-ply garbage toilet paper that cost virtually nothing to produce, but is sold to them at a premium because they were quoted something else. And once they had the contract, the prices went up because what they needed was not what they were quoted for. And they fall for it every time. The school system is just being murdered in Philadelphia. People are losing access to basic health care at a school with thousands of students. People are not having access to a person who's got anything in the remote means of healthcare provision, like a nurse or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And they cost more to go to those schools, which is coming out of taxpayers in the cities. So you've got cities that are already have huge pockets of low-income housing that are paying more to go to school at a place that has less resources with teachers that are paid virtually nothing to be there. And yet it costs more overall to the taxpayer and the state. But the people that make the toilet paper are sitting pretty because they had a deal with the government in Philadelphia. What does that say?
It says that it's very corrupt, and I'm going to go a little unrelated here. But, people always talk about the Citizens United ruling, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Philadelphia School District is the perfect example of how there is no difference between a union and a corporation. They will do anything they can for power, even if it means screwing over the kids. And the solution that the people in Philadelphia are proposing to the state government is, let's have people in Bucks County and every other suburban county pay for it.
Yeah.
Why should, I live in the suburbs. Why should I pay for it when I had nothing to do with their own failures? If you really want to, and I'm going to be honest, part of this blame I give to the people. If you believe that your school district and school board are so bad that you need to get funding from other counties to fix the mess that they made, vote them out.
Especially because they have more funding than we have, and they're not using the resources efficiently. And because of that, you say, it costs, I'm just throwing out numbers, this isn't exact, but the proportions are very similar. Say that they're getting per taxpayer household, in the income tax, not the income tax, the landowner's tax that basically goes towards the schools in the district, in the counties, etc. Those people may be paying $5,000 in the suburbs, and in the cities they may be paying $8,000. And the schools are getting all that money in the suburbs, and they're not seeing that money in the cities. And there's a reason for that, and it is the government corruption, and it is the issue of, I don't want to say greed, but it's private interests, realistically, is what it comes down to. Private interests are getting in the way of public education.
Oh, no, I'd completely say greeds, and one of the reasons is, forgive me for cutting you off there, but if we take a look at unions, what the Philadelphia unions are doing is they're going up to the government, they give them a contract, the government will not reject it because they don't want the teachers to go on strike. And that's the problem with the unions. They have such a stranglehold on the government. It's like, for instance, my left hand is the unions and my right hand is the corporations. They're both holding the government by the throat and squeezing the life out of it. And in turn, the government either does the same to them or sticks the money in the pocket.
And we all know what happens.
Exactly. You want to know what happens? Take a look at Philadelphia. Take a look at Detroit. Take a look at Chicago. It never ends up working when you give any organization too much power.
And it's scary.
Philadelphia, I'm not a complete supporter of complete privatized schools, but Philadelphia makes it really tempting for me to be so.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you look at how well executed the private schools in Solebury, New Hope, in any of the surrounding areas of Philadelphia, and even in the cities themselves. The private schools they cost less for the taxpayer. And they're so useful because the people that come out of there have such better rates of getting good jobs, getting higher paying jobs, and getting accepted into better colleges. It just is what it is. And it's what I'd call single payer education because, it's the person that wants the education is paying for it. You're paying in taxes directly for the education anyway, so why not pay either a little bit more or a little bit less, depending on the area, for a private education? It all comes out to the same amount.
Yeah, and, I'm far from a socialist, but I still believe that public schools should be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if there is going to be private education, a lot of when they make private schools, they don't compete, and that's why a lot of times with private schooling, the prices can be so high.
Yeah.
If you're going to privatize a lot of schools, then you have to do it right. You have to let them compete, because if you don't let them compete, then you're just going to have a bunch of schools in 50 different neighborhoods that are going to jack up the prices and screw kids over. And you do that, you're going to be just like the unions. Screw the kids, give us the money.
Well, I don't want to harp on this too long. We already kind of ranted about super aggressive behaviors of not only our country, but also our local governments, our crony capitalist system, all these things.
Are you cool with a few more questions, or?
I absolutely am.
All right, awesome.
I don't want it to be too long, but honestly, this interview has been really good so far, and I kind of really like having somebody that can reference individual events, and I like that because honestly, when I do this kind of thing normally with other people, it's really hard. I mean, aside from Miles is really good about this, and that's why I started the podcast with him. But just as an aside, it's hard to find people that know how to reference specific events and or specific quotes. They're usually like, I heard X, therefore Y, and that's not really the best way to go about debating things.
You just said a up algebra equation.
Yeah, basically.
X, so therefore Y. I mean, what's next? A plus B equals CZF?
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, you look at it algebraically, even just logically. Algebra is just logic. It's linear logic. And people just kind of attribute things to experience when they hear it. And a lot of that just comes down to psychology. But as I digress, we got through a lot about Hillary and about primarily Democrat-oriented issues. What do you feel about Trump? How do you feel he did in the debates? How do you feel he's going to do as a president?
Okay, I'm going to have to take this as probably the first of two questions because, after this I have to go.
Okay.
But, in the case of Donald Trump in the debates, the first debate, I'll just let my voice going down illustrate how he did in the first debate. But the second debate, I think he won.
I think he was on fire, yeah.
And, I said it on Twitter. And by the way, if you're listening to this, at Stooge Man Polly on Twitter.
That's right here on the screen, as you can see, my friends.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
But, in the case of the second debate, I said it on Twitter. Are you ready for the lies? Mm-hmm. Because Trump can kick her ass on emails and every other scandal she's been a part of, just as Hillary can do the same to Trump. And what the debates really, really, really come down to is who can leak out the most scandals within an hour and 30 minutes. And I'm going to be honest, one of the problems I have with the debate is, for instance, in 2012, they said Mitt Romney lost the debates because he believed Russia would be a problem. Well, I mean, for Christ's sake, now it's a problem. Mm-hmm. Now you have to look back and say Mitt won those debates, and I know Russia's a problem because of the European Union, which I believe is the most politically criminal organization out there. But still.
Well, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, we'll get to that next time. But that was but that is, that's just an example of why I think debates can be a little messed up. I mean, and on Facebook, which I'm going to keep anonymous for this interview, I stated that the first debate was the most intellectually devoid thing I have watched all year politically. Yeah. We went from Rand Paul to this. I registered Republican just to write in Rand Paul and watch Donald Trump. I don't even know how to describe him.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Base his whole campaign off of what a market libertarian is doing. By the way, Julian hates him too. He compared him to a gonorrhea and compared Hillary Clinton to cholera.
Ugh. Although gonorrhea is minorly annoying, cholera just will kill you.
I've never had either one, thank God.
I haven't either. I'm just going off of what I know.
I'm sure. But anyway, yeah, man, fire me your last question.
All right. So when it comes to politics, do you care what other people associate themselves with? Do you think it matters who associates with who politically as long as their views are the same in terms of like politicians themselves? I'm not just talking random people you talk to on Facebook, but yeah.
It really depends. I remember I got into a debate with a Marxist-Leninist who was, talking about oppressing free speech. And, that's one example where I say you shouldn't even call yourself a Marxist-Leninist because Marx was, he was an anarcho-communist. And don't get me wrong, I disagree with Karl Marx on almost everything he says, but I don't see him as a guy who would be a complete enabler for the anti-free speech movement.
Yeah. So, like, if you saw Hillary associating with Barack Obama, you'd automatically have some ideas, which she does, and Michelle Obama gives speeches in lieu of Hillary when she doesn't come to a state, and I think that's pretty cool, I guess. But Do you ever feel like those people are automatically part of the same bandwagon? Does it ever, just from your perspective as a human, are you inclined to see people as part of a bandwagon or as individual people?
Like, for instance, Hillary shaking Obama's hand, seeing them as one.
Yeah. Would you just refer to them both as Democrats, or would you be more inclined to say, okay, Hillary's an individual, Obama's an individual, what do they believe?
Well, if you compare Hillary and Barack, they are pretty different. Don't get me wrong. I think Barack Obama, as a president, we could have done so much better. He wasn't on the Wilson level of bad. He was below average.
Okay.
In the case of Hillary Clinton, I can see the Woodrow Wilson thing going on there. I see Barack Obama as a liar. I see Hillary Clinton as a liar times 10. Like when I think of the Democratic Party, I'm never going to go out there and say every Democrat thinks this way, because then, you're sounding just like them.
Yeah.
You're sounding just like you're doing just what the media wants you to do. You need to learn how to hold hands with people who stand opposite of you.
Absolutely. And that's literally the only reason I ask that, is because that's kind of the whole point of this podcast and this format, is that I want to talk to people who have different beliefs as people, and not as, here is our token Democrat or here's our token Libertarian,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty much why I ask. I just wanted to get your opinion on how you see things, and if a party defines the person or the other way around.
Well, look, you're on the Chicago School of Economics, and I believe more in the Austrian School of Economics. I think we did pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't quarrel a bit because we didn't get into Milton Friedman's wonderful idea for $2,000 for every American. I'm sorry, I had to take my shot.
I completely agree with you that it sounds crazy, but I honestly feel like in a proper socialist economy or a proper social liberal economy like that, that would not be as crazy as you'd think.
I don't really see it as crazy. I see it as a generous idea, and it just goes to show that Milton Friedman was the quintessential adorable old man that everybody wants to hug. Mm-hmm. But I do disagree with it, and it's not really the fact that I disagree with it, because someone's getting money. I never will support anything that says the government should give this person money just because they're doing X. That's where I disagree with it.
That's why I think it should be more of an equality thing, that every single person, regardless of status, income, etc., can get that, because at that point, it's a human issue and not a hierarchical or merit-based issue.
Right, I completely agree with you. Anyway, we're going to have to continue that another time. I have to run. Phil, thank you so much for letting me be on here. It was an honor. It was great to hear common sense from everybody this year, but this is definitely one of the most fun times I've had doing it. This and Dem Exit come really close, but I'm so glad to be on here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, and I hope to have you on again at some point. For those who don't know or haven't heard, it's at StoogeManPoly on Twitter, so check him out, give him a follow. He needs followers because he talks some really good sense, I tell you what. So yeah, thanks. Did you want to sign off with me?
Sure, why not?
All right. This is Phil.
This is Stooge, man.
And have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.